All right, welcome to the Ascendo Reliability webinar series. And today's topic is one that we had to postpone about 2 months ago, I think almost 3 months ago, I think it was. And I think it was August, I had this originally scheduled. And I got called in on jury duty. So you never know if you're going to be called in or not. I was on that, dial in and see if you had to go to court or not. And of course, that morning they said, come on in. And it was at a 9 o'clock report, which is right on top of this event. And so we had to postpone it. Ended up giving us a couple more months to advertise the event. And looks like we're getting a pretty decent turnout. So hopefully that'll work out well for everybody concerned. But the topic is one that was sparked by a question I received a couple of different times and stories from people that um, were working to eliminate MTBF from their business, and we're making progress, and we're moving their team to reliability or availability or the appropriate metrics for their particular system. And then they answer the phone for a customer and they say, well, what's your MTBF of your system? Your data sheet says it's 98% reliable over 5 years. What's the MTBF? Or that's the only thing they'll request is MTBF. Well, I'm sure you've seen this in one form or another, or hopefully you haven't asked a supplier of yours or a vendor of yours for MTBF values, is instead ask them what will fail and when, how do they know? Might be a better way to phrase that. But let's say a customer calls and says, I want your MTBF for your system. Unfortunately, this is not all that uncommon. And so it's something that we need to be able to respond to and deal with. And so let's explore a couple of ways we can attack this issue straight on. So the first thing you can do, obviously, is just panic. You've got customers that don't know what they're asking, more likely. Or if they do know what they're asking, it's not really clear what they want. And they may not know what they want. So you can panic, brush up your resume, and go find new customers, maybe, or some combination of those things. That's not always all that useful. A more common, more subtle approach is just restate it. Right? So you want MTBF. Do you mean reliability? And what is it you need? What is it you're asking? Feign some ignorance and say, I'm not really sure what you mean by MTBF. How do you define it? Might be a way to respond quickly. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a couple more details a little bit later. But then there's also the idea we just accept it. Well, that's my business. That's my industry. The customer's always right. All of those other elements. Well, I'm going to, and this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that's seen me present before or talk about reliability, is if you don't challenge the use of MTBF, one, we don't know if they're asking for the same thing that we're responding to. They may not have the same understanding. And two, is it's probably not exactly what they need in order to make a decision. And so accepting it is actually doing a disservice to our customers and to their ability to make decisions. And so I'm going to try to make that argument a little stronger as we move through more of this presentation. So let's say, and I changed some of the details of this so that the original people that asked me questions wouldn't get identified. Uh, uh, Not that I don't think it would be a problem, but it's just using a generic situation here. And so let's say you're working on a system of some sort, say a vehicle of some sort, and you have your goals, you have a model, you've got a reliability plan, you've worked through a bunch of materials, you've built an understanding of what the reliability performance is going to be, and you work with one of your vendors and the first thing they want is they want to change your goal to an MTBF value, or vice versa, is that we're working with a customer and they want to know the MTBF value. Yeah, well, panic comes to my mind as the first response. So hopefully you're not with me on that one. So in the chat window, let's say let's use the supplier situation. You've created a specification to your supplier that does not include MTBF and they change it. And they report back to you, here's the MTBF that we're going to provide. What can you do about that? Go ahead, use the chat window, and what would be your response? What would you do with your supplier in this case when they change your requirement? And hey, Thomas and Gulen, welcome. A couple different cities I recognize, St. Louis and San Francisco. Cool. I can see a few people are typing there. Go ahead. What would you do if you had a supplier change? Ask for the FMEA. Okay. You know, it's the one way of asking that is, well, what will fail? I mean, what are the failure mechanisms? Yeah, make them justify. Yeah, I agree with you, Joshua. Make them justify why they're using MTBF. You know, where did you get those figures? Yep, Tim. Yeah. Sometimes, Sean, asking for a full reliability analysis is not specific enough. You know, and what they probably will do is ship you back uh, they might just ship you back a parts count prediction model, say a Telcordia or a 217 plus or some system like that. And that's what they would consider a full reliability answer. Yeah. The health of your inventory, that's a creative way to ask it, Jim. I like that. The concept of saying, well, what do you mean is by MTBF? What are you assuming is what I'm seeing here, right? But what is it that what can we do with a supplier doing this to us? Yeah, so Michael, there you are. There's the assumption of constant uh, failures with time. And I would want some rationale for that, not just the assumption that it occurs. And so how did you get there? And Thomas, I agree, it's oftentimes just the question of, well, what's your evidence that you have 90, I'd go back to the statement. What is the 98% reliability at 5 years? If that's the requirement we gave them. And if they give us an MTBF value of 50,000 hours, say, well, it may or may not. I haven't done that calculation in a while. I picked those numbers kind of randomly, but I think if I remember from previous days, that I think those are actually the same thing. But, well, I doubt that. 98% over 5 years, let's say it's running 24/7, there's no way 50,000 hours is going to meet that requirement, MTBF, or represent that. But the things like how did you get there, what is the justification for it, are all reinforcing the idea of using MTBF. Rather say, MTBF, you know, if it was me, I'd say we don't use MTBF here. How dare you? Um, do you? And I would probably challenge them and say, do you understand what you're talking about? That's just me. Your approach hopefully will be a little more tactful. But a lot of the questions you asked and the suggestions you made are right on target. Is, well, what is it that you're saying? You're giving me MTBF back. How does that translate to reliability, and what's your evidence? Right, and then you can start uh, looking at more detail at the elements that are included in that. All right. So what should you do? I mean, I gave you my ideas, and you've suggested a handful of things like that. I mean, it ranges from find a new supplier to restate the requirement. All right. if it's the requirement is, and if you fully state it, it might be, we want 99.5% reliable over the first 3 months of operation, 98% reliable at 5 years. Now, how is it that you're going to meet, your product meets those requirements? Show me a cumulative density function, or show me the life distribution such that it meets those requirements. And then more importantly, well, if you are having trouble meeting those requirements, so then what are the issues? What's likely to fail and what can we do about it? And how can we make sure that we get the right information about your product to make it work? Right? So there's a bunch of different elements here that we can challenge or ask instead of just saying, oh, okay, you give us an MTBF and we're good. Yeah, a Weibull, it may be a Weibull plot as Weibull CDF can. It doesn't have to be. It could be a non-parametric model, or it could be a log normal distribution, or it could be a combination of different distributions aggregated through Monte Carlo methods into a system model. But if they don't have a clean perspective of how their product's probability of failure occurs over time, then do they really understand their product? And so what we see, and it's way too often, is we see people just make the assumption that it's a constant failure rate, and then voila, the calculation is really easy. We've got 10 reported failures, and we've been running for 500,000 hours cumulatively. Um, we have an MTBF value. We can just do a simple calculation. But as you know, if those failures occurred early and faded away, it indicates a non-constant failure rate. If the failures occurred late and indicated a wear-out mechanism, we may have a different set of problems in our hands. But if they do have, like Tim, if you're suggesting, if they are able to provide a Weibull that does show a slope of 1, well, that's great. But where's the evidence? What's the data? What is failing? And how does that support us meeting our goals? So where is the 99.5% reliability at 3 months and the 98% reliability at 5 years? What are those relations to what your evidence is? And so we can ask again, and that's about most of what we can do. Get involved with the procurement organization, with suppliers, and a variety of other things. But it also flags where the risks are. So one of the other courses of action is, well, we may need to focus on that component for testing. Right, now let's flip that over a little bit. Let me see what I got here next. Right, so now let's say you got it. I'm going to change this title and the conversation just a little bit. Is, let's say a customer requests MTBF. You've provided them with a clear reliability. Here's what our product will do. 98% reliable over 5 years in your environment. So let's say the customer is requesting MTBF. And this is just kind of the flip mirror image of a supplier providing MTBF to us when we're requested reliability information. But now we have a customer asking for MTBF. Do those same criteria or ideas that we just talked about, do those still apply? Is there a different set of rules now when a customer is asking for MTBF? Yeah, I agree, Joshua. Sometimes the people asking for the MTBF are just fitting that number into one of their models or comparing it to their existing model. Their internal requirements were all based on MTBF. And so that's the number they're looking for. Some of that is because that's what they get from most of their suppliers, so they learn to ask for it. Yeah, I agree, Joshua. Sometimes it's not well thought out as how they came up with the numbers. So part of the response, whether it's with your supplier or with your customers, to provide some education. Hopefully when the no MTBF site is back up and running, you can point to that site and an article or two there that will help make the point that MTBF isn't really clear what it is exactly you're representing with that information or what it is that you're asking for. So if a customer is asking for MTBF, and I've done this many times in the past, is just come back to them and say, well, how many do you want to last for how long? If we're going to sell you 100 products, how many should function without failure for how long? And they usually have a very clear picture of what that is for them, right? Even if they're just buying one product, you say, well, no product is perfect. There is a chance that it'll fail. What's an acceptable failure rate or probability of failure for you in buying this product? And over what duration are you looking for? And I should have kept track over the years. I've gotten responses of, well, I want 50,000 hours. And it says, well, that's what you asked for MTBF. Is that what you mean? Or do you mean you want it to run for 50,000 hours, about 5 years? And oftentimes is they want the duration and confuse MTBF with duration. So it's, well, if you want 5 years, that's great. But do you want half the products to fail in 5 years, or if you have a single product, to have the 50-50 chance of a product surviving 5 years? And they go, oh, no, 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 I want them all to survive. And it's a common retort from a customer. I had one customer said, can you help me pick out, it was an inkjet printer, can you help me find the inkjet printer that is not going to fail? And I know that there are failures in the population that will break down over 5 years. I want you to give me one that won't do that. And so I was like, it's a little bit tricky question. If we knew how to do that, we wouldn't be shipping out products that were likely to fail. It's hard to tell from the box which one's which. But if the customer wants a duration and they're representing it by MTBF, it's one of the common ways that it's misunderstood. So a little bit of education by prompting them in with a question of, well, what's probabilities acceptable over what duration? And oftentimes that clears it up really quick as to what it is exactly they're looking for. So just ask a couple more questions to clarify what they're looking for. And then reinforce it. Here's what you can do with a Weibull plot, for example, or with the evidence that we're providing to you as a customer or to you as a supplier. You know, if you give us an MTBF value, you're not going to make the early life goal, but you will make the long-term goal, or vice versa. And it's not complete. You're giving us just a failure rate. Over what duration is that relevant if we're dealing with a supplier? For a customer, again, ask for the duration. Yeah, Sean, what do you need it for? And yeah, and I've run into that a couple of times where people have asked for MTBF and they're just filling out the form and ticking the boxes so that they have that piece of information. Maybe somebody else will use it in the organization. Yeah. And so, Jim, I don't think that MTBF is a duration. I think it's the inverse of a failure rate. So it's just a strange way to present a failure rate. Now, if we assume it's constant, we can use the reliability function or the other functions for an exponential distribution, but we're assuming that it's a constant failure rate. Given just MTBF or asking for just MTBF, we don't know. You can calculate MTBF based on any distribution, right? Just the number of failures over some duration, and you've got an MTBF value. So it's what decisions are you going to make? So what do you need it for is along that vein. So, and part of what you're asking, Sean, is, you know, what is it you're trying to do? What information do you need? And that goes back into the education part. But I also then reinforce that is that metric understood? Do you really know what you're talking about? And I struggled in some cases to ask those questions or bring up that subject tactfully. Um, but the basic idea is, how do they want to use it? Well, what is it they're going to use the reliability related information for? In some cases, they really want availability, so a mixture of reliability and repairability distributions. Other times, it's just a checkbox, and we're probably talking to the wrong person to help them look for something else. They may not even understand what they're asking for or where it could be used. Most of the time, though, I run into people that ask for MTBF that really should know better. They're reliability professionals that are trying to do a parts count prediction and need to fill in a blank on their parts count model with your information for your component or for your part. And that's unfortunate. They really should know better. Now, if it's early in the system and it's a comparative and they're doing some analysis that's appropriate to use parts count, well, yeah, okay, I see that one. But if they're going to use it to forecast spares, or they're going to use it to publish what their product is, how reliable it is, those kinds of things, that's just not appropriate. It's not a viable use for this kind of data. Yet you can still get to all of those answers in most any use by giving them reliability, the probability of success and a failure in a duration point of time. And if you're dealing with a supplier, you may be able to just require it. And it depends on the relationship and what kind of um, understanding and contract language and partnership you may have with your supplier. And yeah, Tim, it's used for SIL levels. And I've seen that also. And Andre was telling me a couple of weeks ago that there's some new standards that are related more to safety that's going back to using MTBF values, which is really unfortunate. It's it masks and hides some important issues that SIL and other safety type areas should really be addressing. But if we're dealing with our suppliers, we can just not accept that their request for reliability information is brought back to us as MTBF. It may uncover that they don't know how to provide reliability information in any meaningful ways, which is better known earlier than later. And if it's a